Okay, so what does the Equality Act actually do? So Ryan Anderson, who has been basically book burned by Amazon, they took down his book When Harry Became Sally, even though it is a well-written, concise, and yes, tolerant book about transgenderism. He says over and over and over that people who suffer from gender dysphoria should be treated with the greatest of care, which is absolutely true. It is a semblance of how idiotic our society has become, that we now say that a man with a mental disorder, namely gender dysphoria, is a woman. Okay, that is not how that works. And yes, it is a mental disorder. According to the DSM-4, gender dysphoria is a mental disorder according to the DSM-5, by the way. It used to be called gender identity disorder. Then they renamed it gender dysphoria because they added a requirement in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, that it's not just that you identify as a member of the opposite sex, it's that it causes you depression, which is the dumbest standard for diagnosing a mental illness ever, a mental disorder ever. By that standard, if you walk around saying that you are Jesus Christ today, you are not suffering from any sort of mental disorder unless it also causes you distress to say that. Okay, that's a ridiculous standard. It doesn't hold by virtually any other definition of a mental disorder, but that is what the pseudoscientists over at the American Psychological Association have to say about all of this. In any case, what exactly does the Equality Act do? So Ryan Anderson writes about this. The act updates the law Congress passed primarily to combat racism, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and adds sexual orientation and gender identity as protected classes akin to race. So if you have any reservations about gender ideology, as even many progressives do, you'd now be the legal equivalent of Bull Connor, right? To say that men and women exist and that they are separate, and that a man who believes he is a woman is not actually a woman, and that a man who enters a women's locker room with all the male appendages and says he is a woman should not be allowed to do so. This makes you like a 1960s Jim Crow era racist. Okay, now, to suggest that the differences between black people and white people are anywhere akin to the differences between men and women is patently crazy. The differences between black people and white people do not matter. They're essentially skin deep. That is the whole point. The difference between men and women is a lot more than skin deep. It affects nearly every area of intersexual relationships. It affects how men and women develop physically. It affects how men and women develop mentally. There are significant differences in mental development between men and women. Women have advantages in some areas, men have advantages in some areas, but there are major differences. This is all well-established science. There is not a single thing I am saying right now that is conjecture. What is conjecture is the suggestion that sex is completely malleable. What the left has done here is they play a game. Here's how the game works. They accept, supposedly, that sex is non-malleable. Then they say gender is different from sex. So what is gender? Gender is a collection of stereotypes about femininity and masculinity. Okay, but now that they're stereotypes, you're saying that they're arbitrary, right? Because they're stereotypes. They're not connected to any sort of underlying biological reality. And yet you say that gender is so important and so real that those stereotypes actually make you a man or a woman. So now sex doesn't matter, right? So sex, which is the only thing that we can objectively tell, that doesn't matter because gender identity, which a second ago was a set of stereotypes that were supposedly foisted upon you by an intolerant society, those are the only things that matter. So if a man cross-dresses and dresses up as a woman, then this makes him transgender interested, perhaps, right? Maybe he's actually a girl, but it depends on his self-definition. If he's a man who just likes wearing a dress, then for sure he's just a man. But if he's a man who likes wearing a dress and also thinks he's a woman, then he is a transgender person. If none of this makes any scientific sense to you, that's because it has nothing to do with science. It is, in fact, an ideology. It is not, in fact, scientifically rooted. It is based entirely on the fallacy that that biological sex and gender characteristics are completely different, and yet gender characteristics matter more than biological sex. And then what you will see is the final move, which is, well, actually, we're going to go back to that whole thing about sexual dichotomy. It doesn't exist. So you'll see this from the left a lot. Well, you see, there are people who have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes and who manifest as a member of the other sex because of a developmental disorder. Yes, it's called a developmental disorder. If I say that human beings walk upright, that is a true statement. Now, are there certain human beings who are born with a disability and cannot walk upright? Yes. Does that mean that as a class of human beings do not walk upright? No. It means that some people have disorders. Okay, that does not mean that you redefine that exact term. Okay, what people on the left like to do is take edge cases, right? They like to take genetic anomalies and then treat those as though this creates entire new classes of human beings. This is incorrect. It is not right. It's all ridiculous, but This has become the new normal. So now they're trying to enshrine this into law. And this has some pretty dire ramifications for your freedoms. Everything from freedom of association to freedom of religion to freedom of the press to freedom of speech. All of it is going to be ground down under the boot heel of an authoritarian left that decides that basic truth should be verboten. Okay? It is a basic truth that men and women exist and exist on the basis of biological characteristics that are objectively verifiable. That is a simple reality. If you died today, there will be people 100 years from now who will be able to look at your DNA and they will be able to tell whether you're a man or a woman, and your subjective self-identification will matter not one whit, because all you will be at that point is bones. We will be able to know whether you are in fact a man or a woman simply by looking at your bone structure. We do this right now in archaeology. We can tell what sex your baby is before they are born. According to the left, by the way, you can't tell somebody's actual gender until they die, and even then you can't use their biology, because your gender could switch any minute. There are people who are 45 years old who have been a man all their life and have sired 7 children. And if they decide they're a woman, not only are they a woman, they were always a woman. Because not only does transgender ideology violate the boundaries of biology, it violates the boundaries of physics. It's incredible. It's a time machine. You have to erase every vestige of the idea that this person was ever a man. Right? It's not just that Bruce Jenner changed his name and became Caitlyn Jenner and had some surgeries. That is not what happened. Bruce Jenner was always Caitlyn Jenner. Bruce Jenner was always a woman, you see, while winning medals at the Olympics, which makes him the most accomplished female athlete ever, by the way. Right? So it turns out that biological men are even the best female athletes. It's incredible. But now this is going to be written into law, and you're going to be cudgeled with it, and your children will be cudgeled with it. Let's not pretend that this is anything but what it is. It's an authoritarian move by the left to cudgel everyone into line. It's an exercise of absolute raw power. That is the attempt right here. I hope you enjoyed that clip from The Ben Shapiro Show. If you did, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay up to date on all of our future content.